Katie, thank you so much for coming to the show. It is so wonderful to meet you. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing?
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm so excited to be on the podcast and to spread the message about psychedelics and preparation and integration. So this just lights my soul on fire. I am a licensed clinical social worker in the state of California. I work with PTSD and trauma, but I also do psychedelic preparation and integration. So some of the organizations that I've been working a lot with most recently have been, like retired Navy SEALs who have gone through certain medicines, as well as their spouses, perhaps, helping them to understand what the journey is going to look like, how to prepare, and then, of course, how to implement the things that they've learned into their daily life, as well as how to really expand on their own natural gifts that they have just remembered because they've been able to remove some of the cloaks of trauma and time and the narratives of what the world really brings to them. So I have a huge passion for the psychedelic space. I also do a lot of different somatic type modalities. I utilize EFT. I'm a biofield tuning practitioner. I do healing touch, which is somewhat similar to Reiki, but really takes quite a while to get certified in that. Well, I'm not certified. I stopped at level 4 because I did not want to do like another master's degree for another certification. But I was able to utilize and engage in those treatments because we were using them in the hospital that I was a therapist at. So we were one of the first programs for trauma and PTSD that actually started using energetic modalities in order to help people heal what was going on energetically and somatically with them. So I'm very passionate about being able to utilize traditional therapy methods as well as some of these energetic methods in the healing and implementation of what healing the soul and the mind and energetics would look like.
Oh, that's so amazing.
Yeah.
I really loved how you called trauma the cloak of trauma. Is that a particular visual that you kind of came to understand? Did you coin that term?
I, it may have been said somewhere before. I don't know. I have this tendency to think I'm really unique in what I'm saying, but who knows? I could have heard it on a podcast or anywhere for all I know. No, but that's really what it is. When we think of a cloak, we think of the things that shield us or hide us from the world outside. And so much of trauma is about the isolation and the being unseen. All of the symptoms that we see with trauma really lend people to transition into a place of being alone and of isolating and of removing themselves from the engagement of the world and engagement in life and engagement even in their own soul needs, because there's just this deep, profound distrust of being able to tap into a sense of self, into the body, into the energy, because it all can feel so overwhelming. So there's a suppression that happens with that. And when I think about the suppression, I think about the invisibility that sometimes kind of comes with that. And that feels very cloak-like.
Yeah, I really like that term. And I know there's, like you just said, invisible, but while you were talking, I was thinking sometimes when you wear the cloak of trauma, and this is just speaking from my own personal experience, you think that everyone else sees you a certain way and all you are is what they see in that cloak. And when you have the opportunity to unveil, wow, like you say, what a weight lifted off, what a freedom. And so now no longer are you even concerned about what other people think or what you're shielding from the outside world, because it's not relevant any longer.
The other thing with trauma that I often am reminded about is trauma happens, generationally, right? We carry ancestral trauma as well. If we can hand it down, then, it's in our own genetics. But there also is that element of our environment that creates us to be who we are. And I find that with a lot of people who have complex trauma, and it's just, that's a loaded wheelhouse, but there tends to be this different set of energetics that come along with it, aka this is normally what we see with the empath. So the empath having a difficult time being able to differentiate what energy is theirs and what energy is not, and even what thoughts are theirs and what thoughts are not, and even what pain is theirs and what pain is not. And I think some of this comes from being in an environment when you're so young of needing to be able to read or navigate the energetics that are happening there in order to stay safe. So as people who grow up with childhood trauma or complex trauma throughout life, I believe it becomes very difficult for them to even know who their authentic self is, the remembrance of the authentic self. And part of removing the cloak is looking at some of those shadow pieces of us, the voices that aren't ours, the pain that's not ours, the emotions that aren't ours, and the energetics that aren't ours, so that we can begin to peel them off layer by layer in order to feel and recognize and embody the person that we actually were created to be, aside from all of those other rocks in the backpack that have weighed us down for so long.
Can you give us a relatable term when you use complex trauma? Can you give us a little bit of an understanding of what that word complex adds to the trauma definition?
Yeah, absolutely. So complex trauma is more trauma that has happened over a lifetime. So whereas, then you might have like a single case trauma where you've had like a horrific car accident or something. So complex trauma tends to begin happening for most people at a very young age. And one of the things that happens with that is because it changes our perception of the world and our view of safety in the world, we tend to engage in things that feel unsafe over and over because it's so predictable to us. It's like, even though I know that this relationship doesn't feel okay to me, I stay in this relationship because I know how to navigate it. It feels safer than being outside of a relationship like this. Mm-hmm. So complex trauma tends to attract more trauma in life.
My sister put up a meme that says, I feel safer with red flags in relationships because that's what I saw growing up I was raised on red flags.
100%.
Yeah, interesting.
100%. And that is where a lot of the deep trauma work comes from, is being able to recognize those red flags and understand the difference between a feeling of excitement and a feeling of fear, because those two things oftentimes get very confused within the body because they feel very similar. So learning how to come back to a deep sense of trust within self, and being able to facilitate that relationship with the individual soul really helps us to begin to identify what is excitement and what is fear and what is a boundary and what is not.
I feel like there's a threshold that without a lot of safe space and grace and the right medicines to lift up the default mode network, which, the psychedelic work is so cool in doing, and people become really acutely aware of this hole that they've had, within themselves. I was sitting with someone very close to me at breakfast this morning, and she was telling me that, off any antidepressants, she feels this, incredible hole in her soul. And I feel like that is so scary, in what the work you do is kind of help people soften, listen, go with the flow, and move through that. Can you tell us a little bit more about threshold work of feeling safe enough to do it and moving through it?
But also a fairly long process in order to really kind of get to the root of it and begin really understanding what it's like. And of course, psychedelics tend to get us there a lot faster. It's many years of therapy in one night, and the beautiful thing is that when we have adequate preparation and integration, it really comes together quite beautifully for the most part. But the depth of that really comes from being able to fulfill the longing of desires that feel authentic and true to oneself, and to be able to facilitate that connection between the mind and the body, and also really leaning into the things that bring us joy. And I think for trauma, that is one of the things that is so often forgotten, are the things that bring us joy. We tend to put a dim switch on that because either we've forgotten or it's not felt safe to be able to have that form of expression. And that form of an expression is really what the soul is requiring us to do. It's to have that human experience of joy and longing and belonging and of wholeness. And when we begin to go in and kind of look at the shadowy aspects that have kind of contracted around the soul, that have made it difficult for it to express itself, it really gives us a beautiful idea of what's on the other side. So I think that's probably the most beautiful thing about looking at these aspects of shadow, is because there's just so much wisdom and brilliance within it. And that really is where the soul shines, is when we begin to look at the wisdom and brilliance that is behind the shadow, and seeing just what it is that it's protecting, so that we can really engage in that and then utilize that going forward consistently in our day-to-day life.
Oh, such a good answer, such a good definition. And can you give us some examples of maybe some clients that you have worked with, as far as what joy was buried and what they were able to find in as far as freedom and light in their own?
Yeah, absolutely. So I recently worked with a client who, an incredibly intelligent, beautiful individual, suffered from depression due to childhood trauma. This person's soul expression was art. It was art. It was the way that the body could move, and the fluid expression of the emotions in that way. And later on in life, after high school, there had been several more incidences that really bound into the soul, and that person lost a deep sense of trust within themselves. And through the use of psychedelics, they were able to then see what weight had been put upon them, that they had been carrying for so long, that had caused depression and isolation. And as I began working with this person, we started really looking at the protective mechanisms of those things that had been put there, and why they were there, and how in some ways it was like a cocoon for a butterfly. Like, it just kind of allowed some space for the development until it was ready to really come out and express itself in a very cognizant way. So we were working with shadows and really looking at small bite-sized ways that we could get in there and begin to allow some soul speak into the day-to-day life. And I actually just recently spoke to this individual, and they said that for the first time in probably over a year, they danced. Oh. And it was a dance that went right into flow state, and there was nothing in between this person and spirit, and all it was is just a moment in time of full embodied expression. So looking at the shadows and really looking at these heavier parts of us are really important, because again, they really are just messengers. They're just go ahead.
Did you just say that you work with clients to help them make more time for the soul to speak?
I do. I'm a full believer that traditional therapy and talk therapy, and I may get slammed for this, and that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and stand up and say it anyway. Traditional talk therapy, it's not as helpful as people used to think that it was. We really have to get down into the energetics of what the body messages are trying to tell us, of where the trauma is stored in the body. And of course we know it is, because we've got, Bessel van der Kolk, and we've got Peter Levine, we've got all these experts who are just beautifully indicating just how incredibly important it is for us to be able to move the trauma in the body so that we can release the messages behind it. But I utilize energetic methods to begin to kind of move and create space for us to inhabit our being. And I actually do this a lot with my integration work too. I teach people how to utilize and read their own energy, how to utilize their energy, how to feel it, how to share it with other people, which is so fun. But part of the reason we do that is because, again, with the soul is our embodiment. It's our entire being. But when we get cut off from the mind and the body, it can feel suppressed or somewhat deadened. And so when we begin to get people back into their body and familiar with their energetics again, it helps to stabilize the sense of trust within themselves to begin to read what is happening within the messages of the body. So the woo-woo side of me really loves working with the energetics of the body and just of the electromagnetic field, because it is such a powerful part of us. So, it's the fun part about doing the coaching, but it's also a fun part of therapy as well, as we begin to move further into this idea of using somatic or energetic therapies to begin to move things and look at them and allow them to really process in a very different way.
Humanity is such a spectrum that I feel like it's got to be so unique and mind-blowing to teach people how to read what they're feeling. And I can see how, like, on one level, it's pretty basic. Now, a person would at one point react with an emotion and maybe start using drugs. Mm-hmm. And now, after work, they realize, whoa, I'm having a trauma response, and they know what to do and move through it, allow themselves a day to just dive into it, talk to somebody, and then move through. But what I find kind of fascinating is that, we're such a diverse population and we all do this so differently. How is it for you as a coach to work with women and men with all sorts of different PTSD and trauma? And it must be fascinating how it comes up differently.
Fascinating, challenging, exciting. One of the things that I like to rely heavily on is just an openness and being able to listen to their words so I can understand how it is that they process things, because some people tend to be much more heady, where they're more intellectual and they're more rational. And so being able to describe the process to them would be very different than it is for somebody who tells me, oh yeah, I've been feeling energy in a room where I could see spirits from the time that I was little. So, it's always a matter of difference. Yeah, absolutely. So we just go into listening mode and we just stay open to that. And then, maybe with somebody who just is more intellectual, we begin to describe just the electromagnetic pulses of the body. We can read this. We can see EKGs. We know that when we look at brain scans, we can see different areas lighting up versus, somebody who is more apt to see the unseen. They kind of get it a little bit more quickly. So I can jump right into, okay, we're going to start learning energetic boundaries. We're going to start with grounding cords. We're going to start really like calling in our energy consistently. So it's fun, it's challenging, it's interesting, and there's never one person that's exactly the same. And so, I feel like I'm constantly growing in this field as well. And I think that our work is never, ever, ever done, thank God, or we'd be dead. We'd be light again. We'd just be gone and ready to, incarnate all over. But, for now, it's just like enjoy the ride and allow yourself to be an active participant in the process of continuing to learn as we are all growing together.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. So will you take us back? I'd love to hear about you, Katie, as a child, where you grew up, and were you always someone who felt in tuned with the healing path? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I, like a lot of empaths, have trauma to thank for some of my gifts. And I actually grew up on a small farm. My parents were divorced. My father, which is where some of the trauma enters in. My father was actually a pedophile, and he was a very violent man. I had a lot of trauma as a child. But the one thing that gave me was an ability to be able to read energy. So I spent a lot of time with the animals on our farm. I was able to, we had a big stallion. I think his name was Midnight. He was just big black stallion. And I used to just toddle over there at like 2 years old, and I'd just go sit underneath him, but he didn't like people. Wow. But he loved me. So I would just go sit underneath the stallion and he'd just stand there and like stand guard over me. So I've always had a really interesting relationship with him. Yeah, until you hear my mom like trying to figure out how to coax me out from underneath this 5,000-pound horse. But So it really did help me to devise this ability to be able to read energy, to be able to understand what was coming before it ever came. So that really was probably the development of my gift for being able to have such a keen sense of intuition and a clairsentience, a knowing, and the feeling, and then the claircognizant of just the knowing. And then I was really blessed because my mother never discouraged my gifts of utilizing healing, and she actually really was a huge proponent of it. I remember at one point, I believe I was probably in third grade, she had both of her feet operated on and was off her feet for 6 weeks. And I remembered always just feeling how painful it was. It actually makes me kind of nauseous even thinking back to it right now. So that's something I get to work on. That's an indicator of something that hasn't moved yet. But I remember working on her feet and just utilizing my hands to just move the energy around her feet. And I remembered the feeling of her feet feeling so different. They were no longer hot and the energy was no longer constricted and thick, but it became very fluid. And I remember just looking at the relief on her face. So she was one person who very much accepted my gifts as a young healer. I've always had a very special relationship with plants as well, probably because I was so in tune energetically to things, but you couldn't get me out of nature. Nature was the one place where I felt completely whole and safe. So I spent a lot of time outside. I spent a lot of time with trees, just laying down in the grass and being one with the earth. So that really, I think, was probably the foundation of my ability to understand, read, and utilize energy and plants in such a healing way. And I also will say that throughout life, not everybody was accepting of it. My first husband, actually, he used to get these terrible migraines, and I never knew what I was doing when I was doing it, but I would try to pull the energy out of the back of his head, and he could feel it, but he was one of those very logical, rational people. He's like, "What are you doing? Stop." He thought it was so weird. So I've definitely been on both ends of the spectrum, with people being completely open with it versus people just, thinking it was way too crazy and not acceptable at all. So that's always been a fun thing to work through. But it really was my own trauma that brought me into the space of healing, both with energetics and with plants. And I have been through my own deep psychedelic journeys that have really helped me just to remember
Can you
the
take us
essence of
back
who I
to
am.
how old you were and what was going on with your first experiences in those?
Well, I wasn't actually young when I had my first experience. My first experience was actually with ibogaine and 5-MeO DMT, and that was just within the past 5 years that I did this one. Yeah, I think actually. So I started actually doing preparation integration. Before I actually had my experience, but I was very familiar with expanded states of consciousness, because I worked a lot with meditation and mindfulness and breath work in the intensive outpatient program where I was a therapist. But the ibogaine, I actually think that, it was within the last 2 years actually I did the ibogaine and the 5-MeO. But just deep healing and the spirit of ibogaine is just like this very funny, playful being, and the way that it was able to communicate with me was really helpful for me in understanding where I was and how I navigated the world around me. Ibogaine kind of helped me understand. I always describe this like a Jenga puzzle, how when we have trauma happen in our life, the pieces of the Jenga puzzle might look like rejection or not belonging or unworthiness. And ibogaine tends to go in there and just kind of pulls those all out. It's like this is no longer working for you. This is no longer working for you. This is no longer working for you. And then we did 5-MeO DMT, which is also referred to as the God molecule. And the God molecule just went poof, and kind of put things back where they would belong. And the unworthiness now was something that I was able to look at and be purposeful about the way that I navigated that. So I was learning how to feel worthy versus feeling unworthy. So it really provided me some incredible insight. And since then, I've worked with a lot of different plant medicines for my own healing, which have just been absolutely beautiful. And I've brought such a brightness and a new understanding into my own autonomy and sovereignty and individuality. And I think what I really love so much about the use of psychedelics and plant medicines, and not all plant medicines even that are psychedelics, because there are some very, very powerful plant medicines that are not psychedelic at all, but just have a really incredible essence or spirit or teacher to them, is that they help us to learn quickly. But in that, you also have to be prepared to learn very quickly, because it can unpack a lot in a very short period of time. Mm-hmm. But really just such wisdom in allowing us to come back to ourselves and really remember who we are on the inside without the labels and all of the judgments and what we've been told and what we thought. We've been mind reading for our entire life. It just helps us remember what it is that we really are to our core.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. I have a lot of questions going on in my mind.
Throw them out.
Okay. So the first one is, can you break down your human example and how you lived it out of having those pieces of unworthiness, and then what it looked like in your daily life afterwards, whereas you lived without those nagging, dragging down feelings?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how did it show up? Because I just want to help people kind of demystify and be like, oh my God, I kind of have that too.
Yeah. The one thing that I would love to demystify is that you wake up and it's gone. That seems to not be part of the human experience, because as
like you're saying, like it's a perfect magic pill, and then that's okay, beautiful.
Yeah. It's always going to be work, and really the work just comes with awareness. And I always say awareness is a bitch, because once you're aware, you're then responsible for making a different choice. So in my own personal journey, I feel it, I see it, I witness it, and then I question it. So if it's a feeling of unworthiness that's coming up for me, I will close my eyes and I will breathe into it, and I will ask it, what is it that you're trying to tell me, or what is it that you need? So if for instance, we'll just take, for instance, a podcast that I wanted to do, and then I wasn't able to do it. If that feeling of unworthiness, or if that feeling of unworthiness will come up, I'll sit with it, and I will derive a message from it. And from that, I then know what it is that I need to give to myself. So a lot of this is just about the relationship that we're purposefully propagating within ourselves for ourselves. And some of that is very similar. So going in and kind of reparenting or repatterning those beliefs. Mm-hmm. And more often than not, as soon as I do that, as soon as I recognize it, that feeling is gone.
You don't know what you're missing until you gain it. Mm-hmm. And with psychedelic work, you talked about, you have that voice in your head that says, oh, what's this? Let's sit with this. Or, we don't have to go down that. You don't need to. There's this voice that I didn't even know I was missing. This, when we talk about reparenting, and, it sounds like, oh, you just reparent yourself, but it's a cultivation of this inner loving being. Mm-hmm. And now when I hear that voice in myself, I'm like, damn, it feels so good to have this, someone cheering me on, and someone who has my back within myself. Like, so that experience is just really surprising.
Mm-hmm. And so imperative to our own growth. And, you know, I like to say it's like any other relationship that you engage in, you know,
Oh, that's beautiful.
when you have healthy boundaries, you don't just jump into a relationship and give it your all. You take your time to get to know one another. And this also is as much about developing a brand new relationship, getting to know you from an entirely new standpoint, that it would be if you were engaging in any other relationship. So it takes time to build trust, it takes
Beautiful.
time to build consistency, and it takes time to really get to know what some of those innate needs are, and to
Yeah,
be
and
able to hear those and fulfill those.
we were talking about, or you were mentioning joy earlier, and how, we get to a place to where we can cultivate the authentic self and the soul. But it's true, we have to trust that not only that we're safe, but ourselves enough to allow that joy.
Mm-hmm. And even on the flip side, even if we are in a position where, say we want to try something that's kind of scary, where we're allowing ourselves to be seen, to know that even though it doesn't necessarily feel safe, that no matter what comes of it, we're going to be able to manage and handle it. For example, like being on this podcast is kind of scary. You can see me. I don't know what my voice is going to sound like. My stomach's like got butterflies, but at the same time, I trust in myself enough now to know that no matter what comes of this, I'm going to be okay. And I think that really is the crux of the work right there. Is it's feeling joy, but also being able to extend yourself just a little bit further than you did the day before, and know that it's going to be fulfilling, and that it's going to actually contribute to more of your own soul growth, and manifest a larger sense of trust and knowing within the self.
Yeah. Did I miss anything? Is there somewhere that you kind of wanted to go that
I feel like it's been very fluid, like it's just kind of like
yeah.
happening. And I don't know if it sounds like a ramble. I'll be very surprised to see what I've said
Oh,
after
it
this. We'll
sounds
just
really good.
say
When
it
I
that
put it
way.
together, you'll love it. Um, have you worked with people in recovery? It was really interesting to be at the Las Vegas Psychedelic Wellness Conference and to hear people speaking about, because what was also said often at that conference is that, the number one indicator for people using drugs or alcohol in a dangerous way is the number one thing is childhood trauma. So essentially, the war on drugs is a war against humans with childhood trauma. Have you had people, because I just feel like we have such a need for that, a deeper understanding, because humanity has been self-soothing in so many ways with food, kids are cutting now. There's just this huge array of
Mm-hmm.
violence towards ourselves, really.
Yeah, it's really, really tragic. And from a clinical perspective, I can tell you that more often than not, substance use, abuse, and addiction are co-occurring disorders with depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. So yeah, they go hand in hand. And when we look at it through that lens, it's like, well, of course, like, why would it not? What else are we going to do to not have to feel the thing that we most desperately don't want to feel, or to be able to finally feel okay?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? To not have the edges and spikes of our trauma just grating against our skin. It's like, for just a moment, we can take ourselves out of that suffering and
Mm-hmm.
not have to experience it. So I think that this is a really beautiful aspect of what we're learning about the medicines, and how, not only from like the psyche point of view, how it helps to kind of heal our understanding of trauma, but also on an energetic point of view, where it's allowing us to release that trauma and, again, just come back to the remembrance of self and the soul. But we also are finding so many incredible neurological benefits, aside from bypassing the default mode network and giving us a fresh coat of snow so that we can choose a different path, but literally on the receptors of the brain that are associated with our addictions. And I think that is really such a beautiful aspect that gives people a really nice window of being able to recreate different thoughts, behaviors, patterns, and replacements for, you know, the substances that they've used or the things that they've used, whether it's sex, relationships, you know, cutting, food, whatever, to begin to form different relationships with those things and with themselves.
Oh, just such an incredible breakthrough. I saw a video of a man saying, you know, some people will scroll their pain away, some people will drink their pain away, some people will gamble their pain away. And the man says to the other man, what do you do for, you know, and the guy goes, what pain? Because he was like a AKA normal person. It's really interesting. And I just loved what you said about it gives us a fresh coat of snow. What a beautiful visual, so that we can choose a new path, that we're not forced to be magnetized to the old path. I just love that.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that I really love about the analogy of snow is that if you actually look at the way that the snow falls, because of the way that the molecules fall on top of each other, the way that the snowflakes layer, it actually deadens sound. Oh. So the other thing that I really love about that analogy is that it actually quiets the mind and can allow for a space of clarity of thought, you know, without the busyness of all of those cogs in the wheels running around and around and around. So it actually helps to still the mind. And that can be, yeah, it's beautiful. It can be quite uncomfortable if you haven't been used to that, or you don't know what to do with that for a while, though, which again, just, you know, brings us back to why the preparation and integration with psychedelics is so critically important, and to ensure that people are really working with a qualified coach who is able to help them transition and make progress into implementing some of these skills to help them really regulate their nervous system and keep it regulated, and really help them anchor into their own energetics and their own thought process in a very autonomous way.
My mind is still just reeling with that beautiful visualization of snow. For you personally, I'd like to ask, are there some psychedelics that gave you a fresh coat of snow more than others? This is very unique, and I'm asking this question not for people to run out and try something, because I do agree with you wholeheartedly. This is incredibly important work. It's not just recreation. This is important work so that we can be free and choose a new path. But were there things for you that really worked really better? Was it the ibogaine?
So I would say it was probably less ibogaine than probably sassafras and psilocybin layered. And sassafras is very similar to MDMA. It's MDA derived naturally from plants. But it's a little bit more sparkly. So it actually has some visuals that can be associated with that. And so for me, the opening up of the MDA paired with the psilocybin mushrooms and some of the visuals that came along with that really helped me to better understand from, and I would even say from more of a spiritual standpoint, as it really connected me so much more with my ancestral DNA and my guides, that really helped me to understand more the larger view of what it was that I came here to do, and why I experienced what I experienced, and how those experiences cease to be suffering. They cease to be suffering when you can find purpose behind them. So so I think it probably was more along those lines. And you know, possibly because of just the communication and the way that those different medicines have very different spirits and very different ways of communicating with us. You know, that said, I've also had some really powerful insights from, like, you know, I did a smaller ayahuasca journey, and the ayahuasca journey really taught me about spiritual warfare, and it taught me how to anchor into my own deep belief of protection and call in the things that I needed to have in order to be protected. So, you know, we can equally say that these softer journeys can provide just as much information as some of these harder journeys. But again, it's going to be the lens through which we look at it.
Yeah, you know, I really love that you brought that up, because there are, people who have worked on the frontier of microdosing, like let's just use psilocybin for an example. And I was listening to someone speak about how, with microdosing, you're not going to meet God. You're not going to heal all your DNA in you're not going to do all this stuff. But I kind of disagree, because I feel like all this stuff is so unique to us, and the work is waiting wherever we are. So, I was at that conference and people were talking about microdosing, and then people would come up to the microphone and say, it's just a placebo effect. It doesn't work at all.
Mm-hmm.
All sorts of stuff can work for us if we're ready to show up for it. So I feel like that's interesting that you mentioned you had a smaller dose of when you sat for ceremony with ayahuasca. Would you like to go into that more?
Yeah, that one was actually very interesting. So there was a lot about this scenario that was not really fitting for the way that I would choose to participate in that kind of circle again. There were a number of different medicines that were being used at the same time. And again, I'm a full believer that psilocybin communicates differently than MDMA, and MDMA communicates differently than like snake root or, Sylvia or something, or salvia. So I had a lot of different energies from a lot of different plant medicines that were in that room. There also was not adequate helpers. There wasn't adequate sitters in there. With ayahuasca, there tends to be a very kind of cosmic ethereal energy that comes along with it. It opens up some different gates, I believe, from my own experience. And if you don't have somebody who can adequately really move that or help to direct it, then it can get really intense in a very different way. So different medicines all in the same room, not adequate help. Ventilation in the area wasn't quite well. So I think that there was some circulating energy that was kind of in there. And so all of those things combined really ended up, I think, opening up probably my perception of possibly my own spiritual energetic boundaries. It showed me what that looked like.
Wow.
Yeah. So I got to learn that night what it meant to say no spiritually.
Beautiful.
Which was, and I think if I had not been prepared, that would have been quite terrifying. In the moment, like, I was not prepared. I didn't know that was going to happen. But as soon as I figured it out and I stepped into that power, it stopped.
Wow.
So, navigating these medicines can be a little bit of trial and error. I tried a number of different tactics that I've used towards other medicines before I got to that point where I was just like, fucking stop. No, absolutely not. You're done. Mm-hmm. And then it stopped.
Wow.
So these medicines teach us different things in different ways all of the time. And I think sometimes they ask us to really just show up. And sometimes they ask us to kind of lean back and just receive. Either way, we're receiving a message that really is for a greater benefit to ourselves and can really help us to understand more about our capabilities and probably what we're meant to be doing, outside of that realm.
Yeah, I love that you bring up boundaries. There's a lot of people doing, teaching classes on boundaries. And, when I gave up drinking wine, I thought, oh, okay, I got to develop boundaries. But it wasn't until I was introduced to the psychedelic realm of healing that incredibly huge, gnarly, like immediate boundaries emerged. And that was completely unexpected. I had no idea. So that's a really lovely story that you share, where you had that experience and your spiritual boundaries were just like, absolutely no, you're done.
Yeah, I mean, the medicines they're so intelligent in the way that they communicate. I too have had experiences like you where I've been in ceremony, and in ceremony, it's just the medicine has just said, yes, that's not an issue anymore. And it literally was just gone. I never thought about it again.
Uh-huh. And then can we talk a little bit about how that carries over in waking life? So, I mean, you simplified it. You said it never happens again. But like, let's say you're in a situation where a friend does something or something's just not right, and it's time to move in a different direction. Can you give us an example of how that kind of comes through really strongly now? Because now we're talking about this really powerful warrior woman that has stepped up and shown up for you, and how it shows up at the grocery store now, if it has to, if it's
Yeah, well, sometimes that warrior can take a hot minute to rein in. So, again, it's always about just coming back to how do I develop that relationship with this new part of me that is showing up. And, some of this is trial and error. It's not always super easy. And, the truth of this is too, sometimes as we tap into these elements of self, the people around us don't always necessarily understand, or they don't always necessarily trust the change. So, one of the things that I always talk about is, one, honoring the self and whatever it is that the self is feeling or needing, and taking some time to sit with it, trying not to make rash decisions. We're not wanting to be reactive, we're wanting to be responsive. And when we develop that trust in ourselves, being responsive oftentimes becomes, much easier. But also understanding that these are all new boundaries that other people are learning from us as well. And so it takes other people time to get to know who we are, and this is one of the things that I have found in my own life. As I have had to enter into a state of making changes and making different decisions based off of the things that I've learned about myself and how to honor that. And it has been hard for some people in my life, and there have been relationships that I have let go of, or that people have let me go, because it no longer suited their needs either. And so, there can be an element of loss sometimes with not staying with the status quo. And that can be very, very difficult. It's actually a larger conversation that we oftentimes have with my coaching clients after they go through the medicine and they're going home, maybe to a spouse or family after having had kind of a chaotic or traumatic household, based off of their PTSD or depression symptoms or whatever it happens to be, that they're going home and feeling great. And they feel like this weight has been lifted off of them, but they're walking into an environment with somebody who doesn't quite know them.
Right.
Certainly doesn't know this person who's walking through the door. So, there's a lot of work around normalizing that, and around creating space around that, and around really helping them to understand how to cultivate a new relationship and be patient with that new relationship that they're stepping into with their spouse or girlfriend or family members.
It also brings to mind for me the need for us to consciously and mindfully redesign our home and how we think of home as this like incredible sacred space. Do you have practices about that with your home?
All the time, like a ridiculous amount. I'm a really big believer in just purging. Get rid of the things that are holding energy that don't serve your highest good in this moment. So if you've got old letters from girlfriends, if you've got, clothes that were given to you from somebody that you are no longer in contact with, that's not special, go through your house and systematically purge those things, because they do hold the energy of, of that experience. Talk to your house. Our walls hold energy. Our houses do so much for us. When you walk in your house, say, "I'm home. Thank you. I'm so happy to see you."
Oh my God, I love that.
I'm so happy to see you.
I have to tell you, okay, I love this idea. I took a bath beforehand, and for the first time, I talked to the bathwater. I was like, thank you, for being water, and just charging it.
You were charging your bath water. This is one of the things that I often will do with clients. I'll have them take 2 cups of water And I will have them just take a drink out of each cup so that they can see that the cup of waters are exactly the same. And then I'll have them charge one. Put some love, some positive intention, some gratitude. The palms of my hands are vibrating like crazy, even just talking about this right now. And then I'll have them try both glasses of water again. And I'll say, tell me what's different. What did you notice about the taste, the texture, the smoothness, the sweetness? What was the same and what was different?
Okay, so you talk to your house.
So I talk to my house.
Let's hear all the things that you talk to. I want to hear all the narratives.
I talk to everything. I probably would be the crazy lady, like later on in life that just goes around and like tells my pen how beautiful it is. And that's okay. That's a part of me that I have learned to accept. I talk to my rocks. Of course, I talk to my dog. I tell him he's the best, greatest boy that ever walked the earth on 4 legs. I talk to my car. I thank my car all the time for getting me places safely. And again, I think some of this just comes from a deep sense of gratitude for having what I have. And I will say that, out of all of the things that we can bring into our day-to-day life, I believe that gratitude is probably the absolute most important because it brings us into the current moment. Mm-hmm. If I am expressing gratitude for this light, for giving me light, or for my water for being water, or my food for being food, I'm not thinking about the future and I'm not thinking about the past. I am right here in this moment. And there is no greater gift in my belief than being in the current moment, because in life we let so many of those pass by due to the inability to be able to observe them, based off of our own mentality or circumstances, that when we really are able to anchor into the current moment, it really just changes the flavor of life. Mm-hmm. So
Thank you for sharing some of your practices. And would you mind even going deeper? I'd like to know what's running through your mind in the moments when you're first waking up in the morning before you fully arouse. Are you moving to gratitude then too? Or is there a practice that you like at that time and then also at night?
Yep. The second I am conscious, I immediately need 10 gratitudes. I was always a believer in prayer, and in prayer, we always said thank you. Mm-hmm. But actually, now that you say it, I do think that it was when I really began working with states of expanded consciousness that became so much more profound to me. Mm-hmm. I also think it probably was entering into a state of working with people who had so much trauma that it really highlighted how much gratitude I had for my own healing and the work that I'd done, and how I really just wanted to anchor into that. Mm-hmm. And I have all of my clients do it. All of my clients.
Oh, mm-hmm. So interesting.
It is. And there are so many neurological benefits to it too. We need to get our daily dose. We need to get our daily dose of dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin and endorphins. And when we start off our day with gratitude, we're automatically getting 2 of those, right? We're automatically, and possibly 3, if you've got your dog next to you, or a spouse or a friend, or even your favorite stuffed animal, like you're also getting some oxytocin. Mm-hmm. So it's just a beautiful way to bring yourself into the current moment. Again, also because so many people wake up and their minds just hit the ground running of all of the things that they need to do that day. Mm-hmm. So when we slow it down enough to do gratitude, and I say it doesn't matter what you express gratitude for, it can be your toes, it can be your sheets, it can be the pillow, it doesn't matter. So I always do gratitude the second I'm conscious. I always go through like my soul council. I give God gratitude for being here. I thank my guides for being with me, my angels, my archangels, my ancestors for bringing me here, my sovereign benevolent ancestors for their guidance and protection. I got a whole thing that I say, and it's heartfelt every single day because I feel it. Also, I don't get out of bed until I do 5 to 10 big diaphragmatic breaths. I really just ground myself back in my body. And then, I'll try to just keep my mind clear for, a couple of minutes before I get out of bed. And then following that, I'll get up and I'll do a good meditation for 45 minutes to an hour. I'm going to begin moving my body again and getting some exercise. I have fallen off that. I have fallen off of that practice for a little while. But just trying to be really mindful about the things that really equate to a healthier sense of full self.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then before I go to bed, I do the same thing. I do the diaphragmatic breathing. I do some gratitude. I thank my soul council, God, for bringing me here. And then I'll usually throw on some binaural beats with a meditation or something, and then I'll fall asleep that way.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And then throughout the day too, remembering how important it is to center and ground yourself throughout the day. I tell all of my clients that the easiest way to really regulate the nervous system is by being grounded in times when you don't need to regulate the nervous system. So that just means that we are consistently going in and doing some diaphragmatic breathing.
Even when you don't need it.
When you don't need it. Yeah. Throughout the day, that way it's like, that way you decrease the amount of time that you spend feeling frazzled. It doesn't take as long to come back down because your overall nervous system isn't up here anymore. It's here because you kind of off-gas some of that throughout the day. So I find that to be really, really helpful too, just continually connecting back to the body, back to the breath, throwing down some grounding cords, releasing what no longer serves me energetically, and then allowing myself to bring in with consciousness the things that will help me, which is joy, gratitude, and being in the present moment.
That's so amazing. And what about with food? Have you changed a lot after doing the psychedelic work? I guess there isn't a classic way, I've heard some people say, oh, everybody, if you really get into psychedelics or psilocybin, the mushroom wants to teach you how to save the planet. And so we're all going vegan. But what I feel is that there's much more of awareness of what your body wants.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. No matter how many mushrooms I've taken, they have not told me to go vegan. I also grew up in Montana, where hunting was a way of life. That was part of that was the only way that we really ate meat growing up. And some people are going to hate this, but there is a certain relationship that you develop with the things that you bring into your life. And no matter what we're eating or how we get it, we need to have a very healthy respect for it and for the preparation and for the way that that we are treating it. And so I think that the one thing that has been most prevalent for me is just a really deep regard for the things that I bring into my home and onto my plate, and really looking at ethical ways that if I'm eating something that's animal based, an ethical way that it was, raised or hunted, or, I really believe that there's an energetic around that, so just having things that are sustainable, that had a chance, to really at least have a good life while they had their life, is really important to me. I will tell you that any time that I go into a journey, the one thing that I really crave is pepperoni pizza.
As you're going into the journey?
Only because I have to fast. And so I always want the pepperoni pizza, even though I really don't want the pepperoni pizza. For a pepperoni pizza right now. But, but that's before the journey. After the journey, I usually want things that feel high vibrational and clean.
And with your business and the work that you're doing, like, where can people find you?
My heart is very much in the coaching space. Right now I'm on Instagram, Kathryn _LaRoe _integrative coach. Feel free to follow me there. Most of what I'm just putting up right now is free content. I haven't delved into offering too much right now because I'm in an incredibly busy season with therapy and coaching and different retreats right now. So it's just not been a priority for me, but I really love working with trauma. I really love working with empaths. I really love the psychedelic preparation and integration space. So if anybody's interested, you can hit me up on Instagram. if you guys reach out to me via DM on Instagram, I will get back to you. So.
Well, thank you so much for just revealing yourself and the work that I appreciate it so much. The work that you've done on yourself and everything that you've gone through to be the most authentic and real and in tuned being here to continue to do this work, because we just need it so much.
Well, I love that you're doing this podcast, and I've been watching you and the people that you've had on, and you're spreading such a beautiful message and really allowing people to understand the intricacies and the benefits and even the work that goes along with the use of psychedelics and psychedelic assisted therapies. So I think it's really beautiful. So thank you for the invite and having me on here and for hearing me out. It's been wonderful.
Oh, thank you. You're so welcome.